cmpradio.net. It's the station. cmpradio.net, the voice of Chester.
Hey y'all, it's your host Diamond with What's New-s Delco, and we're joined tonight by Kayla Kachi. She is an educator and a new preschool teacher, so we can give her a round of applause for that new job hiring today, actually.
Oh, good. Okay, congratulations.
So congratulations. So we're also joined by Seisha Elmore from New Voices for Reproductive Justice.
Love when y'all say my name right. Gets me going. No, you did great.
So we got a lot to talk about tonight, y'all. So we're going to cover sex education. And with April being Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we're also going to talk more about what we can do to service people out in the county and also just prevent those instances from happening. And we're going to cover Black Maternal Health Week, just because every year annually, Black Maternal Health Week is held from April 11th to April 17th. Just to amplify the experiences of Black women and Black mothers and birthing people. And we want to continue to amplify those stories. So mainly that's just a little Google definition of Black Maternal Health Week. So I'm going to pass it over to Seisha to see if you can talk more about the purpose of it and why it's so important and how this work helps New Voices in Power service the people and their mission.
Yes, indeed. So, I mean, you gave the very Google answer for Black Maternal Health Week, but it really is a week designed to educate people around what is happening in Black maternal health, not just across the country, but in our own localities. I know by now we all know the very startling statistics. All week I've been hearing Black women are 3 times more likely to die than white women, but people don't know that in Philadelphia it's 4 times more likely and 5 times more likely if you're over 40. So it really is a huge disparity when compared to our white counterparts. And the bottom line of it is racism. I feel like I've also been hearing all week, oh, we need to, doula program, like pushing doula programs, which is great and wonderful. I have a lot of friends who are doulas. I've been able to build a great network of doulas, and doulas really are just one piece of the puzzle, because doulas create that level of advocacy that you may not be able to have for yourself.
Right.
However, that is just one piece of the puzzle. The bottom line of it is, how do we really address the systemic issues that are happening in our medical system that causes harm to Black women?
Right. Right. I'm actually glad that you mentioned the racism piece, just because medical racism is real.
Very
And
real.
just seeing how those narratives are amplified on TikTok, but in a positive light, I'm just like, there's no way that we should be trying to make jokes out of literally someone's life that could be put on the line just because you
Absolutely.
don't want to service them properly.
And I know, so I can talk all things reproductive justice, and I know that the highlight is on Black maternal health and the racism that Black women experience in the medical system. But overall, it's the harm that Black women experience, period. Not just when they're pregnant, not just when they are about to give birth, not just in their postpartum phase. It is at all levels of the care that we seek and we need, that we experience violence in these systems.
Right. So, what do you think are the main challenges that mainly Black women and even the LGBTQ community have to face when even attempting to look for services like this?
So I feel like that's like a three-folded
Essay
question
question.
there. Lots of layers there. One thing is Black women, Black people's pain is not believed. When you think about the history of this country and the history of our medical system, which actually was birthed in Philadelphia, where the father, I'm doing air quotes, y'all, air quotes, father of gynecology experimented on Black bodies to really develop this knowledge behind the woman's body as we know it today, is laced in, it's just laced in violence. Our bodies were not honored. Our bodies were mutilated. Our bodies were harmed. The level of violence that we experienced at the cost of developing all of these ideologies and procedures, and just, I'm sorry, I get so I get caught up.
Yeah.
So when we go to the hospital, because now this is rooted in these medical curriculums, right? So all the stuff that these doctors, I was about to call institutions, child. Let me not.
No filter. I mean, call
Right,
it what it is.
University of Penn. All of that they created at the expense of Black women's bodies is rooted in these medical curricula that, doctors, future doctors, nurses, medical professionals, healthcare professionals all learn from. So if you think those curriculum that they all learn from is based on racism, is based in white supremacy and patriarchy, why wouldn't that be carried down from generation to generation to generation if nobody is actively trying to combat or change that? I feel like that is the root, because that is how we get our medical professionals, right? And some of that, yes, is starting to shift, but it's time to take it to another level. Now, as far as queer folks, there is so much that goes into why we don't necessarily receive equitable care. The bottom line really is people have their own biases when it comes to queer people, when it comes to who they think you should be, how they think you should act, what is considered normal and operating inside of the binary.
Right.
So a lot of our trans folks can't receive equitable care if biologically they are a male, but they present as a woman. Queer folks may not receive care because of harmful experiences that they've encountered in the systems and don't want to go back. You know what I mean? So there are a lot of barriers when it comes to not just access, but also bias.
100%. And I know for me, I know my dad's probably watching this. He's going to kill me for saying this. But
Lord have mercy.
even last year, I had a pregnancy scare. And I say pregnancy scare because, one, it wasn't even me being concerned about having a baby at this time. It was more so, oh my God, like, what am I going to do when it comes to actually the birthing process? Am I going to be able to go to a hospital and actually trust someone to take care of me properly, or will I just be like dismissed completely? There's so many different things that you just have to now take into consideration. And like you said, with the education piece, all throughout school, I didn't learn anything about doulas or mainly birthing alternatives. It was mainly just you go to the hospital, they treat you there.
Take what you can get.
Exactly. Either C-section or do the birth literally while it's happening in the moment. And I was just like, I learned about doulas in my freshman year in college, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So it's really mind-blowing to me, the narrative that they put out and how people are taught that the medical field is the only way to go when there are so many different routes.
Absolutely. And can you
I want them to hear you.
Yes, there you go.
Had to pull her mic over, y'all.
Absolutely. Can you guys like go into describing and like the definition of a doula for those who may not know actually like listening to this what it is?
Yeah, so a lot of people confuse doula and midwife. A doula really is your advocate. A doula is someone who is going to make sure, is going to help you develop a birthing plan and make sure that birthing plan is followed to the T. So you should absolutely have the birthing experience that you want and you deserve and you desire. A midwife is your medical professional, right? They are someone who is actually going to, your doula does assist with the birth, but the midwife is the more medical kind of liaison person.
Yeah.
So that's why you also have a midwife when you're in the hospital. Like people have a midwife sometimes in their homes, but you also have a midwife when you're at the hospital as well.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, because I mean, like, I didn't know about it until, you know, just a few months ago. So I can only imagine for those listening being like, wait, what is that?
Yeah, there is a lot of education happening around doula care right now. I know that there are programs in the city of Philadelphia that offer free doula care for any person who wants to have a doula, despite the cost. There are some hills, some mountains, some valleys to go through to get those costs covered, especially through like public assistance, Medicaid, and, you know, other like health insurances. So right now that is the point of advocacy, because doulas put in the work and they deserve to get paid.
Yeah.
And birthing people are doing their own work and they deserve to have a doula. So how can all of those things be true at one time and everybody get what they want and need?
Right. And our co-host, she isn't here tonight, but Melita Reagan, she's actually also a doula.
Nice.
So I feel like everything that I should be knowing for future references is definitely coming through her now. And I can get that knowledge for free for right now.
Absolutely.
So eventually when I do want to make that decision and try to plan out a maternal plan,
Yeah.
or whenever I want to conceive in the future, I feel like now I'm learning a lot more. And I'm actually getting upset at the education system with how they just impose, no, medical. Just go straight to the hospital. Like there aren't even hospitals closing in Delaware County right now. So it's like a lot of those local resources are no longer there, but you're not even mentioning what the alternative could actually be.
Yeah. Hospitals are closing all over the country, and it is leaving folks in areas that they are now defining as maternity care deserts. So people, and especially rural people, you know, towns where you might have one hospital, you know what I mean, and that hospital closes down. And let's please just not pretend that Black people don't live in rural areas.
Right.
You know, how impactful that is, people having to travel upwards 2, 3, 4 hours just to get to a hospital. What does that mean when you have an emergency, and especially an emergency that is linked to, you know, your birthing experience? And so I'm not really, it's a rising problem, so I don't know what's being done to address that at that time. I do see it as another thing that calls for the need of doulas and midwives to assist in home births. But even that seems like it's becoming unsafe, as we've heard the story in Texas where they removed a child from the home after a home birth.
Yes.
So another thing that is just like ripping me apart right now. But
Yes, welcome to our wonderful system. Don't we love it? And I'm actually glad.
No, actually, we don't love it.
that was
like,
that
we
was
need to change. We need to change ASAP.
I need a little more tad of sarcasm on that one.
We don't love it at all.
We actually
Not in
don't
the
love
slightest.
it.
Not in the slightest. To be clear, I am not a fan. So I'm actually glad that this week is Black Maternal Health Week, and just April in general being Sexual Assault Awareness Month, because I feel like we don't discuss enough those who are sexually assaulted and then are left with a child to conceive, and they're not even serviced the right way. So I feel like a major conversation that should come up in general is sex education and what should fall under that umbrella. Because one, of course, services and resources should be included when having those conversations, and not just being like, let's just wait until it happens to you for you to actually know and think about what to do. So Kayla, I'm actually going to ask you this question, since you have the educator hat on right now and you actually work with kids. So if you were to start having this conversation with the youth about what sex ed could look like and what it should include, what do you think should be involved when we try to at least tell kids now what that could look like?
I mean, I think you're never too young to learn about consent and to have respect and rights to your own body. So me working with preschoolers, consent doesn't look like, when people think consent and like, why are you talking about consent with young kids? They think we talking about like the birds and the bees to like an astronomical level that just isn't it. When I'm introducing consent and not consent into a classroom, it looks like a kid running up to me and wanting to hug me, and me going, wait, what do you want? Can I have a hug, Miss K? Yes. And then that child hugging me and introducing that into their peers. Like, wait, I don't want a hug right now. And that's okay. And I feel like with a child, you're never too young to introduce to a child that, hey, if you don't want to be touched right now, you don't have to touch. If you don't want to give hug or affection to somebody, it's okay. Like, you don't have to do that. And I feel like in the end, a child gets that feeling of right and safety in their own body by doing that. But as for sex education as a whole, I just feel like you're not doing anybody justice by, waiting until 10th grade. 10th grade? 16 to talk about.
I'm telling you, I asked my mom about sex when I was 9 years old. And it was a little bit before that time when my mom said, if you ever have questions about sex, please come to me.
Absolutely.
And it was because I was starting to hear it, like on the playground, in the classroom, little boys, little girls, just talking about it, probably talking about stuff that they didn't even know about, right?
Yeah.
But because I was hearing it, I was like, maybe it's time for me to have that conversation. And I turned to my mom and I said, I think it's time. And she was like, it's time. I was like, the conversation. And she was like, oh, the conversation. Child, she whipped out a notepad, started drawing pictures, everything. So I'm just saying all that to say the curiosities spike well before 16 years old, 5 years old. I was 9 years old, and I probably was the late bloomer.
Yeah, I mean, I personally got my period when I was 8 years old. And my parents come from, you know, like a medical field background. So when I got my period at 8 years old, my mom just whipped out an astronomy textbook and was like, this is how everything works. I got a biology lesson. That's right. And as much as, you know, that did for me, like the biology of it, like, it's okay, you're not dying. This is how it works. There's more to sex education than learning just about sex or just about like the physicality of it all. There's so much more of a takeaway to it. And I think the biggest thing when you're learning about sex education is your safety and your body's safety about sex education, not just like the biology of it all,
and
but
just
like,
knowing that you are the person that can actually say, I want to do this thing,
and not even like above consensuality and non-consensuality, but just how do I keep myself safe in general? How do I keep myself, you know, protect myself from anything that I could be like introduced to that could not be safe for me.
Absolutely. And so one thing New Voices is advocating for is comprehensive sex education.
Yes.
In Pennsylvania, we've been doing that work for a long time just to get the bill passed, saying all across PA, comprehensive sex education is allowable and should be taught. And so comprehensive sex ed, much to your point, really dives into consent and autonomy and all the things that happen to us biologically, but also all of the choices and options that are available to you as a person, as a human being, and not just told as when I had sex education to not have sex.
Right, exactly.
Abstain.
Exactly.
That's the extent of sex education. Don't have it. You know, and they think by not telling you about it actually doesn't stop you from exploring it, much the same way as, you know, restricting abortion doesn't lower abortions. You know what I mean? So it really is, can't we just do the thing that's going to like help everybody out at the end of the day?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
I know that I don't want to take over, but I do want to say this. Recently I have been having this thought about, or actually all along this journey, especially in the last year with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, which used to federally protect the right to abortion. But it really is about beliefs and how deeply rooted this country's belief system is in evangelical white Christianity. And
My daddy a pastor. So.
and how they, but at the same time screaming, you know, separating church and state. But meantime, your ideologies are really infiltrating state, which is kind of restricting life-saving healthcare that people need. And so I'm just of the understanding that two things can be true. Like, you can believe what you want to believe, and I can believe what I want to believe. But can we at some point agree that we can do what's best for humankind, that we can take care of people, that we won't restrict life-saving healthcare, that we can make accessible things that people just need to survive on any level, be that physically, economically, mentally, all of the things. Can we just agree to love and take care of human beings?
100%.
And that's where we're missing 100%. It. That's where we're missing it.
And I'm so glad that you brought up the church and state, because of course the conversation I had with my dad about what sex ed includes and what it could look like was a completely different conversation from when I had to sit down with him again after now being a sexual assault survivor. It was a completely different lens. There was the constant victim blaming. You could have did something else to make him not feel like you initiated that thing. And I'm just like, I was asleep in a hotel room. What consent could I have given while being asleep? So 100% I have every right to feel that I was violated. I was not even conscious during that. So I feel like during those conversations that we would have, we would always clash because it's always like, look, sex before marriage is a sin anyway. You should be safe, but at the same time, if you're not going to be doing it in wedlock, then that's an issue too. So I feel like that sex ed lens, at least for me in my household, was never a really transparent one. And I was like, you had 3 kids outside of wedlock. I'm not a wedlock baby.
I don't know if I even want to go down that block because it has caused so much contention, and even in my own family, right? And so when you think about that, that is the reason why people who are assaulted don't come forward, because they feel like they've done something wrong because of what they've been taught. Or they feel like they will be accused or not receive the help that they need anyway. So what is the point in me even saying anything? It is it's a struggle when you think about how many people have experienced sexual assault. It's one person every 68 seconds in this country. But how many more people it is that don't talk about it or haven't shared it with anyone.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
So I know personally from my experience, and I don't want to go too much into details, but it was a game night in the hotel room with many friends. And even my best friend was still in the room. And I'm just finding myself being penetrated in my sleep. And I'm like, what's going on? So, of course, I'm just in panic mode. And I'm just yelling in the moment. My best friend wakes up. The guy runs out the room. I run out the room. I'm just trying to just gain my sanity about what just happened. And honestly, I didn't plan to go forward about anything, but other people in the hotel hallway, they called down to the service desk. The police were called. My best friend called the police. And I'm just like, I know what this route could look like. I don't really want to take it. And that's exactly what happened. I was devoured in the courtroom. All 13 charges were dropped. And they were just like, if you can wake up out of your sleep, this is literally what the judge said to me. And she was a black woman, which is like, I feel like that's what messed me up even more. Because I'm just like, I'm assuming that you would at least have some type of sympathy towards me. But she's just like, no, if you can jump out of your sleep and run out of a room, you had enough time to consent. And I was just like, whoa. So
Obviously,
this is
I
like,
didn't have time to consent
exactly.
because he got off of me as soon.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
So I was just like,
lady.
if this is what the experience is going to be like just for me, I can only imagine what it's like for people who end up going on trial and stuff. Because that was just a subpoena.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh no.
I'm
done
so
here.
sorry you had that experience. That is so heart-wrenching, and unfortunately it is the experience of many women, and especially Black women and people of color, and also queer people who have these experiences. But I do want to mention, and I've been having this conversation this week as well, about addressing the ways that whiteness, systemic racism, and patriarchy show up in us, even as Black people. It is something that is inherently in us. I don't care if you're the blackest of the Black, but you have to challenge every behavior because it's rooted in whiteness. Everything that we have been taught has been inside of these systems, the education system, the medical system, the carceral system, the economic system.
Right.
Everything we've been taught has been within these systems that have been rooted in whiteness and patriarchy. And so when you encounter professionals, and now Black professionals, oh, mama, I made it. I'm a judge. Mama, I made it. I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. But you were taught in these inherently racist white systems that whiteness rests inside of you. That bias rests inside of you. The patriarchy rests inside of you. And so that is work that we're doing. I told somebody this week, I don't think it's our job to teach white people how not to be racist. I will save that for the DEI folks, but we absolutely should, as organizers, as sisters, as aunties, as grandmoms, as parents, as professionals, challenge how whiteness shows up in ourselves, in our communities, and in Black spaces.
Oh, 100%. And Kayla, I don't mean to put you on the spot with this question, but I feel like just with us being on this topic and your background, how do these conversations stir up for you? Especially when, talking about being a survivor, or even just sex ed in general, and just coming from two different lenses.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was a child survivor. I was abused when I was 9 years old. I was in 3rd grade. And when these conversations come up, I am very excited to have these conversations, because if someone was having these conversations with me, it would have saved my life. And because I didn't have these conversations, I didn't know what to do. It wasn't an open thing. People think it's so taboo, or close the door, get the kids out of the room, don't let them hear it. When really, if we had these conversations with our children, we would prepare them for safety. And that is one of the reasons why I'm so happy that you asked me to get on here and talk about this, because I just truly believe if we have these resources, we have these conversations, we have this education, it will save a child's life.
Absolutely.
So just thinking back on when you were in 3rd grade, what did you wish you knew or were able to do in that moment? Like, what do you think would have been the actual showstopper? Like, hey, this could have actually prevented me from going down this route.
I think my biggest thing was, so like I said, when I was 8 years old, I got my period. I had the biology conversation of everything. Of like, oh, this is how a period works. This is how this works. This is where this goes in. I'm like, okay, great. But I didn't really have the conversation of sex and safety. I didn't have that conversation. I didn't really have a conversation about consent. And that is something that I'm taking with me as I put on my early childhood educator hat to introduce to children. Like, what does safety and body safety look like? Those are the conversations that I believe are never too young to be introduced. So I personally just wish someone had reinforced the safety aspect, and that I don't owe anybody like affection or physical touch, because that is something so many children especially feel like they owe to people. Like, when you go into a cookout, oh, well, you need to make sure that you give so-and-so a kiss before we leave. I was abused by a family member. So when you go in to those situations saying you need to give someone a kiss, or you need to give somebody a hug,
or come over here and sit on Uncle lap.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to stop doing that. And that's why I just try to introduce that at school. Like, you don't have to give me a hug if you don't want to give me a hug. You don't owe anybody a hug. You don't owe anybody a high five or nothing. Your body is yours. If you want to give a hug, you need to ask. If you want to touch somebody, you need to ask, because I think that is something so vital that they can take away from that.
Do you have suggestions, Kayla, on how do you interact or deal with the parents around this conversation, right? Because these children are now feeling empowered, like, no, mommy, I don't want a good night kiss. Right? Who taught you that? Oh, the teacher. So your teacher is telling you that you can't kiss your mother? Right? And that is rooted in like who we are culturally.
Right.
And so now you have this like this middle generation, the parents, right? You have your younger generation who is very much learning about consent and even understanding it enough to exercise it. But you have this middle generation who is just carrying on what was taught to them. And any denial of that is a disrespect. And we all know what disrespect means in our culture. So how are we teaching this to that middle generation, right? Who may not be as, quote, woke as like some of us are, because they very much are indebted to the culture of their families.
I mean, fortunately enough for me, I never had a parent say, "Oh my gosh, you know, she won't kiss me goodnight now. Thank you." Like, fortunately, I never came across that.
Right.
But when I think about that, I just think about, well, maybe it's because I haven't had that situation because they've always just felt comfortable. Or maybe because it's mom or someone they're safe with, they know each other's boundaries. But I am not mom. I am not a stranger, but when you first walk into my classroom, when you first see me, I am a stranger. So while you're getting to know me, and you're getting to know a new person, especially, like, hey, I'm going to introduce to you, especially at preschool age. Like, we're one of the first, like, new adults that they learn to trust. And how I build that trust is by trusting your boundaries. So I think that is one of the reasons why, like, I've never came across that. But I definitely think it's something to think about. I mean, if someone does come up to me, I would just tell them the truth. Like, if, like, this is statistically proven about, you know, children are abused. A lot of children are abused by someone they know. So, you know what? It's not a bad thing for your child to learn boundaries. And if you love your child, you want
help
the
them
same
enforce
boundaries.
those boundaries, yeah.
And not only that, but I know, like, I'm an aunt. Like, sometimes I don't want my nieces, like, kissing up on me, and I'm like, can you go in the other room, please? And I know, like, you know, I've seen moms who are like, hey, do you have to, like, kiss on me? Like, you're sweaty. Like, you want boundaries, too. So give your child the same rights to their body as you would want your own. So I think that's, like, the biggest takeaway is that children have those rights and boundaries just like adults do.
Amen.
So a main question that I commonly think about is how do we break down that barrier between how these conversations are had with girls and boys?
Lord
because
have
I
She trying to wear me out on here, yo.
I have a twin brother, and literally I would see the social biases. I caught on to it really quickly because they would be like, yeah, bro, you got your next bounty count up. And I'm just like, okay. Meanwhile, I'm told to be the Virgin Mary, be very careful how you walk out the house, how you dress, how you display yourself, who you talk to, who you actually feel like deserves a right to your body. Meanwhile, you can go meet somebody at the club and dad will be like, I'm so proud of you. And I'm like,
Oh, no.
we need to switch
We are
this
not the
up really
same. We
quickly.
are not the same.
And I'm like, meanwhile, we really need to switch this up because now we're putting women in the bad spot and being like, you're not allowed to have any type of sexual intercourse or have a lifestyle surrounded around that without being judged by it. Meanwhile, men feel like a part of their manhood has to come from things like that. So it seems like, of course, mainly for young boys who are assaulted, they're just like, oh, okay, my body count started young. Like, no, you're actually a survivor at this point and you don't even realize it because of how culture continues to put out those narratives. So
Ask Usher, right? And P. Diddy set him up on a date to lose his virginity at 14, right? So it's not. I mean, it's not just. It's not just about women, right? And I also think that we should be careful how we talk about that and frame that, because there are people who are not biologically women that identify as women, and there are people who don't ascribe to the binary, but they still experience sexual assault. They still experience violence and discrimination because of who they are.
Right.
And so it is a conversation for all to be had, in a very, in a more neutral way. Like, I also think that boys should be learning about menstrual cycles. Right?
Absolutely.
I also think that women should be learning about the inner working, because we are all humans. Right? And so gender is a very fluid thing. Gender is very fluid. And so if you start early separating what is just for boys and what is just for girls, you are now delineating or limiting the education and information that you really could be distributing to this person, or, teaching this child. So I just want, those things have to be considered and kept in mind when having these conversations. But most definitely there are differences in the ways that boys and men and mass people are talked to and congratulated about sex and sexual experiences. And there are ways that women and femmes are talked to and demoralized and even criminalized about sexual experiences. So we really have to do a better job in the Department of Education, how we're educating our young people, and even now opening our hearts and minds to the work, right? This is heart work, it's people work, it's human work. This is not like, the way sex work is criminalized. What resources are you giving to folks? Some people think that, sex work was the last option. People choose sex work. Some people choose sex work, or some people end up there because they think they don't have any other choices. How are you helping them? What resources are you providing?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's so the conversation about gender in a way that violence shows up is just very, very broad. Very broad.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't look at as like, oh, well, I'm going to teach girls this and boys that. That's why I just kept saying kids, children, all of you come here and learn something. Learn something about yourself. To me, there's all boundaries, and especially with young boys, there is a cycle. Sometimes one of the men who end up attacking, it's because they were attacked at a young age and no one stopped their cycle. No one pulled them aside and said,
most times that's the case.
Right.
Let's talk about this. This is something wrong that happened to you. Let's sit down and talk about this. And, they're just meant to deal with that trauma on their own, and then they end up thinking it's okay. And they do it to somebody else. And I'm like, we also need to understand, which is one of the reasons why I do the consent thing with my kids. You're going to get to know me. You're in my class. But when you first walk through my door the first time, I'm a stranger to you. And I'm a woman. And, people believe, well, if I find a woman, that means safety. But not always. That's not always the case. I'm an adult that you don't know no matter what. So we need to get to know each other and know our boundaries. That's whether or not I'm a woman. That's whether or not I'm a man. That's whether or not my pronouns are they, them. I'm somebody you don't know. We need to get to know each other before you hug it up on me. And that's something for all genders across the board. Like, your body belongs to you. No matter how you identify, your body belongs to you. And just like my body belongs to me, you need to get to know my body. You need to get to know consent and my boundaries for my body. So I think if we look at it that, like, all the way through, like, we'll find a common ground.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up that kind of cycle that is perpetuated with sexual violence, because that really speaks to the issues we have with addressing mental health care, and especially in the Black community. I would say, like, pre-COVID, mental health in the Black community was like, that's the thing we do not speak of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's very much like,
just pray about
you don't
it.
go to it, just pray it away. Right? You just don't go to see a shrink. That means you're crazy. You know what I mean? When in actuality, if people really dived into what their healing looks like, this world would be a better place. Absolutely. But it also brings up the issue of access. And so what kind of access is provided to folks who really need care? And then they make mental health care therapists, whatever, so expensive, or they call it even sliding scale, right? I found myself during COVID, maybe I couldn't afford sliding scale. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I got to tell this person my business, my money business, just so I can get mental health care. And so now you're diving into an even deeper issue of people don't want to admit, like, oh, I need this, but I can't afford this. You know, they don't want to admit that I really need to talk to a therapist, but I also need to pay my phone bill. Right. You know what I mean? So what you're going to do, you're going to pay that phone bill. Why? Because your kids need to be able to reach you while you at work. You know what I mean? So there's so many contributing factors as to why, A, healthcare is not accessible to folks, but also, B, why folks feel like they can't access care. And that's really because life be lifing. Yeah. Right? So you really just be out here trying to make it. Right. Exactly. You really are just out here trying to make it. And so people are taking their mental health into their own hands because they feel like they don't have a choice.
Absolutely.
Right? So what are we doing as community, as a system, as a city, as a county to really broaden access to those type of resources? Because mental health is really key when it comes to perpetuating these cycles of sexual assault or healing. Maybe you are a victim of sexual assault or Black maternal health. And Black maternal health. People always talk about the birthing experience, but what about postpartum? What about postpartum? What about foster parents? What about children who are in the system? All these things have a tie to Black maternal health, but I feel like there's a large focus on the birthing experience when that is just one part of who we are.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned the mental health piece, just because I know both out in Delaware County and Philly, we're constantly talking about mobile crisis units and how we actually want to connect those with schools and what that could look like. And I'm just like, even outside of that connection, there still needs to be accessible services somewhere. It's even out in media, for instance, they do have recommendations, I'll say, but they're not even feasible ones for people who aren't working, like who can't afford it right now. So it's like I have to literally qualify to seek help to get me out of this mental state, and I clearly can't afford it. And you guys are like, well, next client, not my problem.
Or they offer you group therapy, which is a whole different set of stipulations. Right now, I got to tell my business in a group. Maybe I am socially inept and don't do well in groups. You know what I mean? So there's also like factors to that as well. I think we really need to consider what equitable care looks like according to the direct needs of that human, because we're all different. We all have different needs, and we've all piled on these experiences. And so how do we continue to be a participant in our own healing, right? Which is a difficult thing to do when you feel like you can't access care.
Right. Right. And then we start to tell ourselves, well, I'm okay. Or is there actually anything wrong with me that I really need to be serviced for? And then commonly in like the Black church culture, oh, just pray about it. Leave it in God's hands. And I'm just like, I'm not knocking that. But at the same time, sometimes you do just want someone to lay that weight on too. Like, I just want to vent and get it all out.
Listen, God is good all the time, but therapy and Jesus. Okay?
Yeah.
Two things. Listen, that's been my message, I feel like, for the last couple of weeks. Two things can be true.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay? Everything is not just one way. My last stint in therapy, when I was just running down, to my therapist, was this, and I'm experiencing this, da, 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 da. She was so compassionate, and she was just like, oh my God, Seisha, like, if all you wanted to do was come in here and vent, if that's all you wanted to do, is just have this safe space to just talk that out, get things off your chest, your mind, your heart, you have earned that. That is that space for you. And sometimes that is all people need.
Right.
Right. So what are we doing to even create safe and brave spaces for people to have that moment where they can vent, where they can let go, where they can scream, where they can cry? The world does not make it safe for us to do that.
Right.
You go out these doors and you cry, you either get ignored or ignored. I don't know how else to say it. You know what I mean? Because people got their own shit going on.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I don't have time to worry about your tears when I got my own shit going on. Who's tending to my tears?
Right.
You know what I mean? So one thing to address that piece of it as community, what we can do is for our neighbors, for our family, for our friends, we can be that safe and brave space.
Absolutely. I mean, as a teacher, you're putting your early childhood educator at, you're putting your therapist at, like,
yes.
There's
so many different roles.
I actually used to work in early childhood education too.
So many different roles.
So many hats, so many job titles, and I think like there's so many school districts in Delaware County right now that there are students who are trying to get help that can't get help because there's wait list after wait list in the county, and they're not able to get these services. And for some, I'm not just talking those who turn into repeat offenders, but those who experience sex trauma as a child. And, there's behavior outlets, and not all of them are good. And then currently you got this fight in the county where you want to throw them all in juvenile detention centers. And that's something, that's another battle.
Abused in that place, yeah.
Another battle to like fight up against. And I think I was just reading an article about, young girls who experience sex trauma are more likely to end up in juvenile detention centers or prison. I'm like, but yet
most times because they're protecting themselves. But go on.
Right. Self-defense is now a crime.
But we're not getting those resources before it's too late. And but before the event even happens, we're not even talking about how to prevent it.
Prevention.
So the first step, I believe, is just always a conversation. It's never too early to talk about mental health, to talk about safety, to talk about resources. It's never too early. Just like it's never too early with maternal health to talk about, like, hey, I haven't had a baby yet. I'm probably nowhere near having a baby anytime soon. Because I go to work and I see those kids, and I'm like, you know what? I'm good for another 10 years. But it's never too early to have those conversations because you don't know what life is going to bring to your table.
Which is, by the way, also your choice and a part of repro justice, because how often are we told as women, as birthing people, that that's like our job, right? Like, when are you going to have a baby? When are you going to start a family? And people really put pressure on you when, at the end of the day, this is stay the fuck up out my joint. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm good. All this me up in here, okay? I'm good. Until there's something growing in here, you need to stay out of it.
Right.
Peace on that. But 100%. I understand also what you're saying about mental health services in the county. I actually was a foster parent for a few years, and before they transitioned out of my home, I still call him my son. My son was having some behavior issues, and the mobile crisis unit was so backed up. They were like, honestly, you might have better luck if you just take him to the hospital to get the psych eval. I took him to Mercy Fitzgerald. They're like, we don't even really have the resources to treat him. You probably need to take him to CHOP to get the psych eval.
So it just bounce you back and forth between
just
places.
all around, and I still had to go down into Philly to even get this. I was about to go into the other leg of the journey, but I'm just saying I understand what you're saying around the availability and the access to mental health services, because here I am at a hospital in a place where I live. I live just 8 minutes from Mercy Fitzgerald. I'm like, this is the best option. It's a good hospital. I'm just going to take them here. And they're telling me, oh, we don't even have the capacity to do this. And if you keep him here, he will just be here until we're able to find a bed for him in a mental institution. What are we talking about now? And that could be a week. What? I'll just take out. What? And we're talking about a 7-year-old child. A 7-year-old child. So when you're talking about families, when you're talking about Black folks, when you're talking about children, when you're talking about in the county versus the city, because the city ain't that much better. Okay? We're really talking about access and availability of services.
100%, because that also takes me back to when I was even looking for therapy or just some type of holistic wellness program or some type of service in the county, and they were like, well, we don't have any unless you're insured under this company, unless you're willing to pay this much for each session. And I was like, no. So whatever. I was in school at the time, so I'm like, I'll just go through campus and see what they have. So I went through them, and they were just like, ooh, this seemed like a little too deep for us. And I'm like, is this what y'all paid to do? So I'm confused. So literally in the midst of trying to heal from the sexual assault, 6 months afterwards, I had to bury my mother. And I'm just like, okay, now it's trauma on top of trauma right now. I haven't even healed from the first thing, and now it's just building up. Before I literally spiral and lose my mind, I need someone to help me somewhere. And literally, I was not able to get that help outside of North Philly. And I live in Upper Darby. So I was just like, this is ridiculous for there to be nothing. And the fact that the DA's office is just like, isn't this what you guys are used to? And it literally gives that vibe, well, you're a Black and brown community. You guys are used to this trauma. You grew up and are rooted in this trauma. You guys can heal on your own. And that was the vibe I got from them. And I was just like, no, this is not okay. Because I was 23 at the time. I can only imagine what, like you were saying, a 7-year-old child would feel like, or a teenager, or just someone who hasn't even spilled what they've been going through on someone else. That's a lot to carry. So we got to do better. We have to do better.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky because I got services in the county from Women Against Rape, that is now Delaware County Victim Resource Center. And they were wonderful with me, even went to my doctor's appointments for my evaluations that I had to go through. And then I ended up doing Child Guidance Resource Center for, years. Therapy is wonderful. Time consuming, but wonderful. And, now I'm going through, being an adult and wanting to return to therapy. And sometimes it's not as easy as when you're a kid, because when you're a kid, they're like, sure, I'll talk to you. What kind of health insurance your parents have? Or even then, I feel like there's more resources when you're a minor from my outtake because of the insurance my parents had versus when you're starting out at a job and you're in your early 20s and you're like, health insurance, what? So it's definitely, but there are some resources out there. It's just, I know now, like going to school board meetings for different school districts, and talking to some of the administrators there who are trying to get students on, mental health resources for whatever trauma and family situations that they're going through, that there's a wait list. Like, wait list out the ass for Child Guidance Resource Center. Wait list out the ass for Women's Against Rape. So it just makes it harder because there's only really 2 places in the county to go to.
Yeah. I think that this is where, as community, I know I mentioned earlier that one way we can address this is by being the safe and brave space to the folks that we know and sometimes even who we don't know. But another way to address this as community, because people are often like, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. Hold these lawmakers accountable. Hold these people that you are voting into office accountable. Make a list of all the things that you want to see, that you feel like your community needs, and take that list to your lawmaker's office, to your state rep, to your council person, to your mayor. To these people work for you. You put them there, they work for you. Tell them what you need them to do.
Primary season.
It's coming.
Yeah.
It is upon us.
Go vote,
Season is
please.
upon us.
4 weeks. 4 weeks. All right, y'all. Thank y'all so much for coming on in these powerful words. I know I'm feeling very uplifted, and just want you guys to tell the audience how they can keep up with you and your work and stay in touch. So, Kayla, how can the audience literally stay in tune with what's going on in Kayla's organizing realm?
So I
Social
believe
media.
from when I ran for school board, my Kachi for Delco page is still up. Do I post as much as when I was a candidate? No. Will I? If you follow me, you got to follow me to find out. So Kachi for Delco.
Can you actually spell that so they know where it actually finds
It's
you?
not that hard of a last name. Okay, guys. So in the alphabet, it's C
Oh my
O
God.
C as in cat, I as in ink, for Delco. So like for Delaware County, but
Is
Delco.
that FOR or the number 4?
Okay, so it's for like the F.
You gotta break it down for people on radio.
You do. You really do.
F as in frog, O as in octopus. Sorry, I forgot how to spell for.
R as in rabbit.
R as in rabbit. Delco.
We know Delco.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Thank you, Kayla. Got the little learning lesson from you, right?
I'm not here to give you a hard time. You got to break it down for the people on radio because everybody they don't be watching. You got to make it clear for the subtitles because they be messing your shit up, especially on Instagram. Okay. For those of you who want to find me, I'm Stacia Elmore. I'm the lead community organizer with New Voices for Reproductive Justice. Their office is based in Philly. We also have an office in Pittsburgh and Cleveland, Ohio. But I'm your lead organizer for the city and surrounding areas. That's how I got to link with Ms. Diamond over here. So you could follow New Voices' page at New Voices RJ. Pretty much on any social media, New Voices RJ on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you want to follow me personally, I'm Queen Fierce, Queen Phierce. As Queen Phierce. I'm the most active on Instagram if you would like to follow me. But you get a healthy mix of my art and social justice work there.
You got to balance it out. So
Yeah.
it's all good. But thank y'all so much for tuning in tonight. Again, it's Diamond with What's New-s Delco. And good night, y'all.
Thanks for having us, Diamond.
Thank you.
Cheers.